Through a reinforced glass door in a hidden underground lab, Ethan saw her, his sister, Melissa, declared dead 7 months ago, hooked to wires, eyes wide, lips trembling in silent panic. A black cat brushed against his leg, as if guiding him here. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The alley was narrow and slick with rain, the kind that soaked through your clothes and lingered in your bones. Ethan's footsteps echoed against crumbling brick walls as he followed the cat's slow, deliberate pace. Puddles reflected the fractured glow of distant neon signs, and somewhere far off, a siren wailed, a lonely, shrill reminder that the city never really slept, only pretended to. The cat moved like a shadow with purpose, weaving past overturned trash bins and faded graffiti, deeper into a part of the neighborhood Ethan had never noticed before. He wasn't sure if it was the hour or his own sleepless haze, but everything felt slightly askew, like the alley had stretched longer than it should, or like the darkness held its breath. They reached a rusted iron gate, barely visible under a tangle of ivy and city neglect. The cat paused, tail twitching, and glanced back at him again. That same look, intent, expectant. With effort, Ethan pushed the gate open. It creaked like a cry muffled by time. On the other side was a forgotten courtyard, once part of an old tenement building that had long since been gutted and boarded up. Broken windows stared like blind eyes from above. In the center stood a crumbling stone fountain choked with moss and cigarette butts. The cat hopped onto its edge and sat, perfectly poised beneath the rain. Ethan's breath fogged the air. He took a cautious step forward. The space was still. Too still. The city's hum seemed to vanish beyond the gate, leaving only the patter of rain and the soft clicking of the cat's claws against stone. Then he saw it, etched into the base of the fountain, half concealed by grime and rust. A name. M. Cole. He froze. The blood in his veins went cold. He dropped to his knees, scrubbing at the letters with the sleeve of his jacket. The rest of the inscription was worn away, but the initials were unmistakable. His sister's name. He turned to the cat, heart thundering. "What is this?" She blinked, slow and solemn, then leapt from the fountain and padded toward the boarded doorway of the building. One paw touched the threshold, and she looked back. The message was clear. This wasn't random. Someone wanted him to follow. Ethan staggered back from the window. The breath punched from his lungs as though reality itself had struck him. He pressed a trembling hand to the cold glass, heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. Melissa. Alive. Her features were unmistakable, even gaunt and pale as they were. The shape of her eyes, the freckle on her cheek, the way her fingers curled inward when she was scared, all of it screamed truth. But this wasn't relief. This wasn't reunion. This was horror. She wasn't resting. She wasn't recovering. She was trapped. The room behind the glass looked like a lab disguised as a hospital. No comfort, only sterile efficiency. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a ghostly pallor on the white tile and metal fixtures. Wires snaked from Melissa's scalp, her temples, even her chest, disappearing into machines whose displays pulsed with unreadable data. Her lips moved again, desperately now, but whatever she was trying to say was swallowed by silence, soundproofed, isolated. Ethan's fists clenched. Every instinct in him, brother, journalist, human, recoiled at the sight. The plaque beside the door read, Subject 6A, Long-Term Confabulation Observation. Beneath that, in red, Do not interrupt without clearance. He felt the bile rise in his throat. The facility was still operational, still funded, still running as if this woman wasn't someone's daughter, someone's sister, as if she were just a case file, just a lab rat in a well-maintained cage. What kind of place was this? Who had hidden it beneath a laundromat in a dead part of town? How many others were behind these other doors, breathing in silence, forgotten by the world? He turned to the hallway, suddenly hyper-aware of his vulnerability. He hadn't seen cameras, but that didn't mean they weren't there. Everything about the space felt meticulously designed to be unnoticed, untraceable, purpose-built for secrecy. The cat brushed against him again, firmer this time. When he looked down, she was staring at him, her tail lashing gently like a signal. She turned and trotted a few paces down the hall, stopping beside another door. No plaque, just a keypad and a single green light glowing steadily. Ethan stepped toward it, pulse thrumming in his ears. He didn't know what he'd find on the other side, but he knew with absolute certainty that everything in his life, his grief, his questions, his sleepless nights, had led to this place, and someone wanted him to find it. Ethan sat in the dim light of his kitchen, the glow from the overhead bulb casting long shadows across the room. The sound of the city filtered faintly through the window, honking, murmurs, distant trains, but in this space, everything felt suspended in a different atmosphere. Slower, heavier. Melissa sat hunched on the worn leather couch, a tattered quilt wrapped around her shoulders like armor, her eyes flicking nervously every time the pipes groaned or a floorboard creaked. Her voice was a rasp now, raw from crying, but it carried the weight of someone clawing their way out of a grave. "They said I was forgettable, Ethan," she murmured again, barely louder than a breath, "that no one would miss me enough to cause problems." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the stack of papers and flash drives she had managed to hide before her disappearance, evidence she'd collected about the corruption inside the foster system, threads that had apparently led straight into the depths of something far darker, something systemic, targeted. Melissa's hands shook as she reached for the tea he had made her, the cup rattling slightly against the saucer. They wore masks, clinical. Everything felt scripted, like they weren't people, just roles. And they kept talking about cognitive repurposing, about pruning memories like dead branches. She closed her eyes tightly, face twitching as if suppressing pain, not just emotional, but physical. They told me I would forget who I was, that I would wake up and thank them. Ethan felt rage curdle inside him, slow, deliberate, and cold. This wasn't some fringe operation. Neurovast had money, infrastructure, silence. The underground facility had equipment more advanced than anything he'd seen in his years covering medical tech expos. And no one knew. Or worse, someone did and let it continue. He looked over at Maggie, curled at Melissa's feet, vigilant and calm, her yellow eyes glowing in the dark like a lighthouse beacon. She had waited in the rain for nearly a year, faithful, watching. "They underestimated the wrong person," he said, his voice low. "You're not forgettable. You're the story they were afraid someone would write." Melissa looked up slowly, her expression a broken mixture of fear and fury. "Then write it, Ethan," she whispered, "before they make me disappear again." The sunlight filtered through the branches of the old oak trees, scattering golden flecks across the worn wooden bench where Melissa sat, one hand resting on Maggie's small, steady body. The park around them was alive with movement. Joggers, families, children laughing near the fountain. But in their little corner beneath the swaying limbs, time felt momentarily suspended. There was no shadow of the underground, no echo of the sterile, echoing halls, only breath, breeze, and warmth. Ethan sat beside her, elbows on his knees, watching Maggie's rhythmic purring as though it were the only truth left that couldn't be manipulated, erased, or rewritten. He had spent months submerged in the grit of systemic horror, sifting through falsified grant reports, whistleblower statements that had vanished into administrative voids, off-the-record interviews in motel rooms where voices trembled behind burner phones. Neurovast had operated under the guise of humanitarian research, using buzzwords like neural repair and trauma erasure, masking what was essentially memory sterilization, surgery on identity itself. But the moment the expose went live, the narrative was no longer theirs to control. He remembered the silence before the storm, the hours after he hit publish, watching the article spread like wildfire. It wasn't the rage of a single story that did it. It was the recognition, the way so many saw themselves or someone they'd lost in the quiet faces of the forgotten. Ethan had titled it The Place Where They Erase People. But it was the faces that did it. Melissa's photograph behind the glass, her eyes wide with remembered terror, had broken the dam. Now, weeks later, their lives were public domain. Everyone wanted a piece of them. But today, here, they had taken back their anonymity. Melissa wore sunglasses and a hoodie. Maggie, as always, wore nothing but unwavering loyalty. "I still dream about the White Room," Melissa said suddenly, her voice calm but low. "But the dreams end differently now. I don't wake up alone." Ethan didn't speak, but she didn't need him to. He reached over and rested his hand on hers, grounding her with the simple weight of presence. The same way she had once grounded children abandoned by the very system that later tried to erase her. Maggie stirred, stretched, then settled deeper into Melissa's lap, a sentinel who had refused to forget, a witness that no algorithm or syringe could overwrite. "You were right to follow her," Melissa said again, her voice clearer this time, a quiet benediction. And Ethan, his throat tight with something too large for words, simply smiled, feeling, perhaps for the first time in years, that he had come home.